Hello and welcome to this Monday's weekly market briefing. We've got lots to talk about, but firstly, Aukus weighs expanding security pact to deter China in the Indo-Pacific region. As well as that, Josh Shapiro warns Joe Biden's gas stance could hurt election hopes. As well as that, and finally, Joe Biden's claims big campaign money lead over Donald Trump. Got lots to talk about on the charts also, with lots happening on the economic calendar, but we'll come to that near the end, so make sure you stay around so you see that. Before we get straight into it though, make sure to subscribe. But the first article to talk about is to do with Aukus. Now the US, UK and Australia are now talking about possibly bringing in new members into Aukus in an effort to build a security pact aimed as a deterrent against China. This comes in an effort by the US to involve Japan in a new security pact to help protect the US's allies from the potential fallout from the Chinese invasion into Taiwan. Now, this is most certainly not the first time that we've spoken about US-Chinese relations, nor the topic of Taiwan, nor the topic of the Indo-Pacific region, as of course, with US and Chinese relations at kind of an all-time low, really, this kind of topic has been, right at the top of the priority list, as ultimately, we have to always remember that the topics of, geopolitics, of trade relations, and just, nations' relations between those between the two ultimately affect markets greatly. And if we just think back to the very start of kind of the deterioration of the US and Chinese relations, maybe going back to the beginning of the Trump presidency, where we did start to see these kind of economic battles between China and the US take place, with of course Trump kind of imposing all these kind of sanctions or kind of trade quotas and that kind of thing in an effort to kind of contain China economically. And that has had a great impact on the markets as a result of that. And we still see the effects of kind of these regulations and these economic sanctions and that kind of thing today, whether that be with Biden's own sanctions on China, which have kind of included certain restrictions on where goods can be produced within China itself and what goods can be produced within China and then imported into the US. And also we know, of course, Joe Biden has kind of imposed his own sanction on any US companies looking to export their chips to China, of course. And there's been limits on that now, and that's kind of caused this kind of deterioration, of course, between the two nations, especially trade-wise. But also, kind of in the military sense, we've also seen, the US and Chinese relations kind of fall to an all-time low, whether that be going all the way back to, of course, the Chinese spy balloon incident, which took place not too long ago now, maybe a year ago, but of course that incident did see the US kind of shooting down a suspected Chinese spy balloon over the US, and that created a great deal of kind of heightened world tensions, as people then started to wonder and worry about the possibility of conflict between the two powerful nations, and ultimately with the issue within Taiwan. And of course at the start of this year, the DPP, I believe the party's called, the more progressive party within Taiwan, did of course win that election, which has ultimately solidified Taiwan in a more pro-independence, pro-sovereignty sense, which has also put the kind of inflamed the tensions between those two nations and the risk of a Chinese invasion into Taiwan, kind of at the very top of everyone's worries, especially on the international stage. So ultimately, relations are at these kind of all-time low levels, and we have seen efforts by both nations kind of to resolve these issues, but the real question is, of course, whether these efforts are kind of just a virtue signal or they're actually trying to achieve anything. We know, of course, that back in San Francisco last year, the US did kind of host Xi Jinping, and there Xi Jinping and his kind of officials were able to kind of consult and talk to, of course, the top US businessmen and CEOs. And then more recently, of course, China hosted their own kind of thing, which included, CEOs from across the world, but also a kind of separate meeting also, which was specifically for the top US businessmen as well. So kind of we do have that situation of, both powers kind of subtly fighting each other militarily through these kind of different ways of establishing their presence in, whether that be Taiwan with their delegation being sent over from the US, as well as weapons being sent over to Taiwan, or whether that be on the Chinese side, which is kind of setting up new islands within the Indo-Pacific region in the South China Sea in an effort to kind of expand their territory and threatening the airspace, of course, of Taiwan. And so, both nations are kind of jousting with one another on the international stage. And here it does seem like Joe Biden is kind of once again, asserting the US's dominance within the region by helping expand AUKUS's kind of presence by possibly even adding in a new member, that may be being Japan, of course. And of course, we do know as well, Joe Biden's made it clear his kind of support for the Philippines against any Chinese aggression. And, we always have that possibility of, the Philippines also joining AUKUS as well. Now, in terms of what's going on with AUKUS, the AUKUS defence ministers are set to announce today that talks will begin about the collaboration on technologies such as undersea capabilities and hypersonic weapons. AUKUS currently focuses on the first pillar of the AUKUS alliance, which focuses on Australia's development of nuclear-powered submarines. And the statement by the AUKUS defence ministers is set to come just before Biden's hosting of the Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida at the White House this Wednesday, as well as the US, Japanese and Philippines meeting this Thursday as well. Now, the US's efforts to introduce Japan to the AUKUS alliance comes as Japan ramps up their own defense spending and therefore has highlighted the prospect of AUKUS collaborating with Japan in order to create and develop new hypersonic weapons. Australia and the UK, however, have been hesitant about the prospect of JAUKUS, which of course is Japan added into AUKUS, since Britain and Australia want to focus on ironing out complications in the current alliance. As well as that, ultimately the two nations are worried that Japan lacks the security systems required to kind of be a part of AUKUS and develop these high-tech systems, which of course are highly confidential. So this is a very important topic though, and I think a very interesting article to kind of note to you guys, as ultimately this will be affecting world tensions greatly, likely raising them, and ultimately therefore affecting markets in many ways. So definitely keep your eyes on this topic, and definitely keep your eyes on the relations between the US and China. That's all to talk about in this article though. Next article to talk about is once again about Biden, but less so about what policies he might be implementing, and more so to do with his stance going into the election on natural gas. Now, Pennsylvania's state governor has now said that Biden's ban on US natural gas exports is critical in order to win the key swing state in 2024. This comes as Josh Shapiro, a Biden ally, warned Biden that his recent decision to pause approvals for natural gas projects was putting at risk the state of Pennsylvania. Now, most certainly we've been talking about the kind of lead up to the 2024 presidential elections greatly. We of course covered the US primary race for the Republicans especially, and the kind of battle between Nikki Haley and Donald Trump was one that was very interesting and was definitely affecting markets greatly. And now, of course, that Donald Trump has kind of won that primary and Biden has won his, we're kind of in this period now in the lead up to the election where we're kind of not close enough yet to the date where debates may be taking place, or things may be getting insanely heated, but of course we are kind of in this era now of, and the lead up to the election, where kind of policies are being developed, stances are kind of being placed, and ultimately what we're hearing here is one of the key Biden allies is kind of recommending to Joe Biden, or even warning him, that basically Joe Biden's key greenhouse gas emissions kind of stance on natural gas is actually going to hurt his election hopes, and possibly even, cost him the entire presidential election race, as ultimately, Pennsylvania is one of those key swing states, which, if we just go back to, last presidential election of 2020, I remember when Pennsylvania was one of those key states which both Joe Biden and Donald Trump were battling over, and I believe the Democrats did take it home, and who went on to win it, ultimately Biden representing the Democrats. So most certainly this topic is very important to cover. And of course, both Joe Biden and Donald Trump are offering very, very different economic stances, which is why we kind of cover the topic of elections and, candidates and that kind of thing. And ultimately, should Joe Biden then hold this natural gas stance, possibly this could definitely increase the odds that Donald Trump is going to take home the win, with Pennsylvania being a strong home for the shale gas industry, which employs many there. Republicans are using Biden's climate policies and natural gas ban as ammunition to claim that Biden is damaging the economy and is hostile to voters in Pennsylvania, with the opinion polls showing that the race in Pennsylvania is extremely tight and the state could ultimately determine whether Trump or Biden end up in office in November. And since Donald Trump is backing the fossil fuel industry, Biden is at great risk of losing the important voters of Pennsylvania who depend on fossil fuels. Biden has only tried to combat this so far by projecting himself as the leader which is looking to support the blue collar workers in Pennsylvania, but ultimately, is that really going to stand? Is that even going to make sense if he's then, critiquing or looking to almost shut down the key industry which is employing those blue collar workers? So I think this is a very important article to note, and one which will be affecting election perceptions definitely this year. Next article to talk about though is once again on Joe Biden. It's a Joe Biden Monday, and ultimately this one's on the topic of big campaign money, which of course is very important indeed in trying to also determine who is going to become the kind of president and who's going to win that presidential election race. Now, Joe Biden reportedly has $100 million more in his election war chest than Donald Trump. This comes in the lead up to the 2024 presidential election in November, and if true, would give him a large monetary lead over his rival, with Biden and the Democratic National Committee reporting over the weekend that they had more than $192 million in the war chests, whereas Trump, according to the RNC, only has $93 million. A size of Biden's war chest, if true, would be the most cash on hand of any Democratic candidate in history, with nearly half of the war chest being raided in March. In March alone. With Biden's campaign manager attacking Trump's lack of funds by saying that most of his war chest was going towards paying off his various legal fees. As we've spoken about many times, Trump is involved in a great deal of kind of lawsuits or trials, whether that be criminal or civil, and as a result it is ultimately costing him a great deal of money, and the risk of him also losing his entire kind of real estate empire and kind of business empire within New York is also going to be affecting his financial situation as well greatly. Now, the two rivals have stepped up their fundraising efforts recently in preparation for this year's presidential race, which is being priced at the most expensive battle ever. Biden last month raised $25 million at a single fundraiser in New York City, which included Barack Obama and Bill Clinton on the stage. Trump, on the other hand, had a fundraiser over the weekend in Palm Beach, Florida, which brought together the likes of some of the former president's top donors who backed his previous rivals like Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley. So, this is a very important article, and, these kind of war chest sizes and all of that definitely influences the way people perceive who is going to win the presidential election, as how much money you have is going to influence how much you can actually influence during your campaign. So very important article to talk about. That's all to talk about in the articles, though. We've covered lots, especially on the political side and geopolitical side, but lots to take home there to start off this week. But the next thing to talk about, of course, is the charts. We've got lots to talk about, and to begin, we are of course on US equities, US indices, talking about the Dow Jones, the US 30, to talk about the US indices as a whole. Now, ultimately, what did we see ending off last week? Well, we saw price shoot massively to the downside, as we spoke about in the last morning market briefing before the week ended, but it does seem like on Friday price was able to kind of retrace back on itself and move higher. And the possibility now is, of course, or the question more so is whether price is now just moving higher to retrace and will now continue to sell off after coming into contact with that 50% Fibonacci retracement level, or in fact will price now continue to the upside and continue pushing to higher and higher levels. So that's the key question at the moment, in my opinion, for the Dow Jones. And if price does then continue to the upside, the question is, of course, will it then continue to break those highs? And if it does continue this sell-off, which is the kind of changing trend that we are now seeing in the US 30 as a result of the recent kind of rhetoric from Jerome Powell, which was more hawkish, then the question is also, how far will the US 30 now trend to the downside, and will price break below this key liquidity zone? Whilst price did not kind of come into contact with that level last Thursday and last Friday, ultimately it does seem like just being in proximity of that area, a great deal of buy side orders was represented and shown. And so the question is, of course, whether price will be able to even break below that. So definitely keep your eyes on the US 30, a very interesting a very interesting index to kind of look at the moment, which is of course tracking those key US equities. That's all to talk about on the US 30. Next to talk about, though, is the dollar, which kind of just like the US 30 started to trend down recently after Jerome Powell's rhetoric changed into something that was far more kind of hawkish and was talking about inflation kind of being persistent and possibly therefore rates staying higher for longer. And that's what caused, of course, US equities to sell off, but quite surprisingly it also caused the dollar to sell off. And largely this is because ultimately investors and traders seemingly still believe that the Fed is going to have to cut interest rates around the same time as was previously expected, and that's why the dollar is selling off, because ultimately they think that the Fed is going to cut interest rates despite inflation being persistent, and therefore that's kind of negative for the dollar, isn't it? So we're in this interesting situation now for the dollar, where despite that more hawkish rhetoric coming out from the Fed chair, ultimately we're seeing a sell-off take place. So definitely keep your eyes on the dollar. Lots happening though nonetheless, and the question is, of course, should dollar's price kind of continue lower now after coming into contact with this liquidity zone? How far will price go? That said, this kind of retracement which did take place on the dollar, and then we did hear from Jerome Powell on Thursday, I think it was Thursday last week, that we did hear from Jerome Powell, price did react to that 61.80. So could price now continue higher? That's a question that we'll find out the answer to this week. So definitely keep your eyes on the dollar. Next to talk about, though, is Euro USD, which has reacted to this liquidity zone now. And to start off the week, the question will be whether price will stay above this area, or in fact will price now just continue to the downside. Ultimately, though, we're getting a great deal of euro data this week, as well as US data, and so anything dollar related, anything euro related is going to be moving greatly depending on those events. I mean, we're getting not only the US inflation rate figure, but also the Bank of Canada's interest rate decision, and then also the ECB's interest rate decision. Very important data and figures that will be coming out, which will be pushing the markets one way or another. So keep your eyes on Euro USD. Next, talk about those pound yen. Not much can be said on pound yen at the moment. Price is just kind of stuck between these two levels, 160-180 on the upside and 160-180 on the kind of bearish move. So price is kind of ranging in between those areas, where whichever area, price breaks above first, that could definitely influence the way we kind of see where markets are going. Next to talk about though is Bitcoin, which of course has kind of been very volatile recently and is kind of almost forming a large range now, it seems, between the $60,000 a Bitcoin level and the $73,000 a Bitcoin level, with price not really knowing where to go. Currently though, price has just peaked above this key liquidity zone, which has acted as an area of support, resistance, and resistance once again. So definitely keep your eyes on Bitcoin and look to see where the price will continue higher from that liquidity zone. Next to talk about though is gold, which is just continuing an overwhelming bullish rally, which is just not looking to stop anytime soon. And I just think we need to provide some perspective to gold's push to the upside, as price is just non-stop with no retracement, it feels like, just continuing to push to the upside. So crazy stuff happening on gold at the moment. Definitely keep your eyes on it though. That's all to talk about on gold though. Lastly to talk about in the charts, of course, is oil. Which on the 4 hourly we can see that price did kind of continue to make new highs, pushing to the $92 a barrel level last Friday, but ultimately then also saw a sell-off take place once price did interact with that zone. So maybe we've got a great deal of resistance up there, but we're kind of moving now close to uncharted territory that we haven't seen for quite some time and haven't seen since October. So price is in very interesting levels at the moment. Definitely keep your eyes on oil. We've got lots of potential to the upside and downside, but obviously the kind of tensions within the Middle East and kind of rhetoric from numerous officials is pushing price to the upside at the moment. That's all to talk about in the charts though. Lastly to talk about, of course, is the economic calendar, where we're getting lots of very important data this week, so lots to listen out for, which I'll go through just now. Firstly, we're getting the US inflation rate figure, followed by FOMC minutes, and then the Bank of Canada's interest rate decision. Followed by that, we're getting the Chinese inflation rate figure, followed by the ECB's interest rate decision and ECB's press conference. As well as that, we're getting the US producer price inflation figure and the German inflation rate figure. As well as that, the British GDP figure will be released this week, and then finally the US consumer sentiment figure will also be released, along with the Canadian inflation rate figure. So we're getting so much inflation rate oh no, that's not this week, but yeah, we're getting so much inflation rate figures this week, and we're getting loads of very important data, as well as important decisions such as the ECB's interest rate decision, as well as the Bank of Canada's interest rate decision. So lots of things to listen out for and look out for this week. We've got lots in the articles, lots in the charts, and lots in the economic calendar. That's all from us at Wildwood Capital though. I hope you have a great trading week, but we'll see you tomorrow. See you later. Bye.